Kevin, you ready?
Yes, sir.
That's a great photo op. Eating cupcakes and
I'm not here for.
Call to order a regular meeting for the normal local liquor commission. Please call the roll.
Mayor Coos.
Here.
Mr. Fritzen.
Here.
Mr. McBride.
Here.
Mrs. Cummings.
Here.
Mrs. Lorenz.
Here.
Mr. Preston. Mr. McCarthy.
Here.
First order of business is approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of October 15th, 2018.
Move approval.
Second.
Corrections or changes? Please call the roll.
Mr. Fritzen.
Aye.
Mr. McBride.
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings.
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz.
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy.
Aye.
Mayor Coos.
Aye. We have complaint and citation settled cases report, and I'll go over those. I don't think it needs action from the council since they've all been settled. We have a case with Normal Catering Company doing business as a Bloomington Normal Marriott, which was a settlement of a fine of $500, their second offense in 2 years. Case dealing with Highland Management Group doing business as Diamonds at 616 Rab Road, Normal, Illinois, a first offense, and the fine was tendered and paid of $250. A case dealing with Freedom Oil Company doing business as Freedom Oil. Also, a first-time offense on that one, and a settlement of $250 has been paid. Schnucks Market Incorporated on Bradford and Normal, also a first offense, a $250 fine. Freedom Oil at 1617 North Main Street, another first offense, $250. Freedom Oil at 601 South Main. Let's see here, that was a second offense and a $500 fine. Chipotle Mexican Grill at 701 South Main Street. A stipulation, guilty plea and settlement agreement was proposed, however, no response was received. A hearing in front of the commission may be required. Bradford Lane Italian Foods doing business as Rosati's Pizza at 1720 Bradford Lane. Also, a stipulation, guilty plea and settlement agreement was proposed, and we haven't heard back on that. Settlement arrangements are in process. Cam Liquors Incorporated doing business as Budget Liquors. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's a new license.
Right. That's all our stipulations for fines and settlements. Item 5 is a liquor license application from Cam Liquors Incorporated, doing business as Budget Liquors Incorporated, and this is a change of ownership, I think.
Yes.
Yep. Motion for approval.
Move approval. Second.
Is there discussion on that item? Please call the roll.
Mr. McBride.
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings.
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz.
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy.
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen.
Aye.
Mayor Coos.
Aye. The license is approved. That concludes our business. Motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Mrs. Cummings.
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz.
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy.
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen.
Aye.
Mr. McBride.
Aye.
Mayor Coos.
Aye. We are adjourned. Call to order a regular meeting for the Normal Town Council. Please call the roll.
Mayor Coos.
Here.
Mr. Fritzen.
Here.
Mr. McBride.
Here.
Mrs. Cummings.
Here.
Mrs. Lorenz.
Here.
Mr. Preston. Mr. McCarthy.
Here.
We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we begin, I'd like to welcome Logan Smith, a new county board member. Logan, you may raise your hand. And newly elected and has come to see, I think, how we do business at Town of Normal. So welcome, Logan. We begin with public comment. We've had 3 requests to speak, and we'll take those in the order that they were received. Again, I would like to remind people that please state your name and address if you wish for the record, and keep your comments to 3 minutes if you would, please. First speaker is Andy Shirk.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for taking a minute to hear my thoughts. My name is Andy Shirk. I live at 7 Kent Drive in Normal. I am also the president of a local company, Beer Nuts Incorporated. Additionally, while I'm the outgoing chairman of the Chamber of Commerce, I'm not here in that capacity, and I think it's important for me to mention that. My reason for asking for a few seconds of your time is that I would like to express my support for the compensation increase being considered for both the mayor and the council roles. From my business-minded perspective, I strongly support efficient government and efficient utilization of tax dollars. That being the case, it is clear to me that the council and mayor are undercompensated due to the time commitment and personal financial burdens placed on each of you in order to serve in these roles for our town and our citizens. Furthermore, I believe your service is likely a net financial loss to you personally, and accordingly, I appreciate your commitment and gift to our community. So thank you for your service to our community. Please support the increased compensation for both the mayor and the council. And as in my professional opinion, you deserve to work for more than peanuts. Thank you.
Next speaker is Ron Ulmer.
Ron Ulmer, a citizen of Normal. Before the mayor and councilperson's pay is increased, I think a couple of issues need to be addressed and resolved. One issue is that long-term office holders have led government to overspend, overtax, and overburden its citizen, resulting in Illinois leading the nation in job loss, population loss, and a loss of college graduates, if not leading a close second on most of those. The town council, I believe, must pass term limits of 12 years for all elected and appointed boards. That would also reduce the burden, the financial burden on you, because you wouldn't be devoting all this time for more than 12 years. When you and other municipality and state legislators meet, it's critical that you recommend term limits for all elected officials in Illinois. I do not any longer vote for anyone who has held the same office 12 years or more. I urge Normal to lead the way to vote for term limits. Okay. The current Illinois Constitution requires a balanced budget and a 3% annual public pension increase. The state ignores the balanced budget requirement, but citizens are told that an annual public pension increase of 3% is sacred. For the past several decades, the compensation trend in the private sector has been to implement 401k type retirement funds, doing away with pensions for new employees. Additionally, I have yet to find one private sector employee who has ever received an increase in his or her pension, regardless of where it started. That's what it is if you live to be 110. As a result of public employee lifetime compensation packages increasing faster than typical citizen packages, most governments in Illinois have had to do one or more of the following. Normal eliminated 25 positions earlier this year. Peoria is proposing to reduce 18 fire and paramedic positions. Unit 5 is increasing taxes about $200 a year, property taxes on a typical house. The paradigm that the public compensation growth cannot be touched is not sustainable. Governments cannot even lay off enough employees to solve the financial problems facing them coming down the road. So I wonder sometimes if anyone asks the public employees if they'd rather get more benefits and fewer employees, or if they'd rather get $50,000 worth of these jackets a year. Like I say, some employees have so many of them that they give them away. I'm sure that you meet formally and informally with other elected officials around the state. A government entities group should be formed, including legislatures, to address the destructive financial death spiral that most governments in Illinois are facing. With one exception, school districts do need to raise the starting wage, most school districts, for teachers. How is normal, and just a couple of comments on, are you addressing long-run problems coming? How is normal addressing the lost motor fuel tax due to increasing electric vehicles?
Ron, I'm going to ask you to wrap it up. You've well exceeded your 3-minute limit.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything being done to replace the road taxes lost by electric? And a shout out to Kevin. My taxes paid for this jacket too, just like your taxes paid for your new jacket last time.
And our third speaker is Mark Tiratilli.
Good evening, everyone. Mark Tiratilli, 1212 Timber Ridge Court here in Normal. I first want to thank the Planning Commission for their actions earlier, extending the action on the Blackstone Trails project. Waiting to hear more input. I think that was a great move, so nice to see that. I'm here to talk about the compensation ordinance. And I firmly believe what it says in Proverbs, that the worker is worth his wages. So if there's an 80% increase in obligations of the office, then so be it. Chris, you're quoted as saying that you're working 40 plus hours a week. Then absolutely, if that's what this job takes, then that person ought to be paid for it. But I don't know that the actual obligations of the job have actually gone up that much. I've seen a lot of the details involved in the process. I've seen the mayor's calendars for a couple of years. This job can be done on the parameters of about a part-time 10-hour a week. A lot of the activity that's been going on, and Chris, no one is disputing that you work hard, but a lot of people see those as not necessarily essential to the job. They see them as extracurricular. So there's, things like going to Rivian events on the taxpayer's dollar, marching in other people's parades, signing on to declarations to pull us back from the brink of nuclear war. These are not essential to town governance, okay? So if we can justify that there has been a significant step-by-step increase in core duties that are statutory, that are staff-related, then great. Personally, I haven't seen that. I'm willing to be convinced of that. I do believe that if that's what it takes, then we should do that. If this is a 40-hour plus position, then let's make this a full-time job. Why half-time? But I've got to see some justification as to why this needs to go up so much. I can see it's been a while. We might need an increase of a little bit. And as a side note, I fully endorse the council aspect of this. I think I've seen the time that the council puts in, and I think there should be a little bit more parity there. So I'm not opposed to that side of this ordinance. But a quick 80% jump in pay, especially at this time. And we've laid off people. We're in a tight budget. It's an election year, and we're going to raise the mayor's pay by 80%. Just from that standpoint alone, it doesn't look good. We clearly haven't had a shortage of candidates. You've been willing to run. You've done well. I've been willing to run. I don't need the $32,000 to make this work, and I'm sure other people would be willing to get into the race as well. So, as I said, if there's a real justification, I would love to hear it tonight. I'm not saying that in a confrontational way. I'm just saying I want to see it justified. We need hardworking people in here. They deserve to be compensated. But please show us the justification for that, and that's what I'm asking for tonight. Thank you very much.
We move on to the Omnibus Agenda items that will be handled with one vote by the council unless a council member would like to pull an item for discussion. I would like to be excused on voting any bills I may have incurred in my duties as mayor.
I'd also like to be excused for any bills I've incurred in my duties.
Thank you. Mr. Fritzen?
I'd ask to be excused from voting on the Bloomington offset bills.
Move approval.
Thank
Second.
you. Items considered under the agenda tonight are approval of a number of minutes. Minutes of the strategic planning session of October 18th, 2018. Also minutes of the strategic planning session October 19th, 2018. Approval of the minutes of a special meeting November 2nd, 2018. Approval of the minutes of a public hearing December 3rd, 2018, and approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of December 3rd, 2018. Approval of town and normal expenditures for payment as of December 12th, 2018. A resolution waiving the formal bid process and authorizing the purchase of a 2018 Ford Explorer in the amount of $25,380 from Morrow Brothers Ford Incorporated, an authorized vendor in the State of Illinois Joint Purchasing Program. A resolution authorizing the execution of an intergovernmental agreement with McLean County for centralized booking services. And a resolution waiving the formal bid process and executing an agreement with Red Box Workshop for design, fabrication, and installation of the Imagine Air exhibit at the Children's Discovery Museum in an amount not to exceed $127,500. A motion expending the Diabetes Disease Management Program for 1 year. Please call the roll.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The motion is approved. We have three items of general orders tonight. The first is an ordinance adjusting the salary of the President of the Board of Trustees effective May 1st, 2021, and amending sections 2.1-2.5 of the Municipal Code of the Town of Normal.
Move approval.
Second.
Second.
Discussion? Ms. Cummings?
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to speak a little bit on this particular item tonight for many reasons, because I'm going to cover everything for this one and the next one, so you won't have to hear my comments twice. It's very interesting, the different perspectives on this topic and this issue. And to some degree, when you say this is a part-time position, you're right. Most of us can do the bare minimum and not serve you with the A quality that you deserve. But let me tell you, you don't have a half-rated council sitting before you. You have people who give of their time, their talents, and their money to be here. And most of us, when I say money, I can say for me, my job. Every time that I do something outside of the realm of my job in the middle of the day, I am threatening my money. So yes, we give a lot. We could be partial in what we do, but we wouldn't be sitting in this building right now. And that's just the truth. It takes time to build relationships, not just locally, but with our federal and state representatives. It takes time to have these additional conversations. And yes, it takes a little money as well. I'm also proud that I say I do sit as an active member for the National League of Cities, where we are highly regarded, continue to be over the years. People still remember Sonia Reese to this day and all the efforts and time she put. They listen to us, and they even ask us questions still in the university communities about our town gown. That doesn't happen just from doing a few hours here and there. That happens from a constant diving into what we do, believing in what we do, caring about what we do, staying up late at night for what we do. Some of us get into arguments with our spouses and have to apologize to our children for the work we do. We no longer live in a world where we can come in here on Monday nights, have a little all-male powwow and leave, because we live in an age of social media where people constantly have questions, which then pushes us to constantly be seeking for answers for you. Not only that, we do live more in a social environment where we are expected to be outside of our circle, to know what your needs are. I can stay in my own bubble and never know what your needs are if I only do the few hours that you think that it takes to do this job. Times are changing. Things are changing. The pressures upon us are changing. And we have to be willing to change with it. Some people don't receive raises, I get that, but those who receive raises, and especially those who work at places like State Farm, to know you don't get a raise for 9 years, you'd probably lose your mind. So what difference is it for those who serve you and serve you with the best of heart? Let me tell you, if it passes tonight, some of us may not see it for many reasons, whether we choose not to run again, whether we lose a race, or even if we don't wake up tomorrow to breathe another breath. So what we're doing is for the future and ensuring and showing a culture that we care about those who serve our community. Thank you for my time.
Thank you. Further? Anyone? Mr. Fritzen?
I think one of the things that is there are several aspects of this that are difficult in that voting on your own raise just seems odd, for one thing, you know. And again, as Ms. Cummings said, some of us aren't ever going to see it. It's not in my future. So that being said, I think if we've erred anywhere, it's in extending this too long, and that's been the history of these increases, these types of increases, and I think that's, you know, the history is in Normal that those who serve obviously don't serve for the compensation, and that's always been one of my concerns. I've expressed it, you know, over the many years I've been here, more than 12, and one of my concerns has been that I've never wanted the compensation to be at such a level that someone did it for the money. You know, I felt it's important for us to protect against that. I think the worm has turned a little bit, as Ms. Cummings noted, that now, to some degree, I believe we have to guard against compensating too little and that becoming an obstacle for some people's willingness to serve and expose themselves to, you know, the new media, the new way of communicating, and you know, that was a complaint in an email we received that you know, and we've heard this on other items recently, that we were surprised. You know, we read it in the paper, and then 2 days, 3 days later, you're going to vote on this, but that's the traditional media have a different role. You know, it's part of it's you know they occupy a smaller space because of new media, and they're challenged to run a business. You know, and so their staffing's less. The column inches in a newspaper, or the amount of time on a radio news program, you know, the detail and the depth that once was there in reporting isn't there anymore. And so, you know, it is a new age, and we deal with those things on a different level than we did before. All that being said, I think the numbers, particularly the number on that we've assigned to the council person compensation, you know, I believe is appropriate. The number that we've assigned to the action on this first item, to the mayor's race, I think is the one that's a little more difficult for those who haven't served in the position to get their arms around. It is somewhat subjective. I've served under 4 mayors, Dick Godfrey, Paul Harmon, Kent Carricker, and Mayor Coos. And each one had to determine with their employer and with their spouse and other interested parties that you know, may have an influence on them, they've had to determine what the job is going to be. You know, the job, there is there's a baseline job description, but beyond that, the job description is really built by the individual and their circumstances. And so how do you assign an appropriate salary to that? I'm not sure I can do that. You know, I ran for the office with a sense that I could probably manage the demands of the office. I'm sure in retrospect, I know that I didn't know the half of it, and maybe couldn't have managed them to the level that I thought maybe I could have. But that being said, I would have managed it somehow. And what would be the proper compensation for that? I don't know. So this number that is being proposed is loud because of its difference with what currently is being paid, more than anything else. If you go back and you know, 10 years ago, and remember it's going to be a couple years before anybody realizes this compensation. So you're looking at a 12 to 13 year period between the last raise and the next raise. And you assign a cost of living number to that on an annual basis. And I understand, and I work in a business where annual cost of living raises are not, you know, in the private sector, they are not something that can be expected every year as they once probably were. But if that were the case, the mayor today would be making probably around $25,000 instead of $18,000. So we would already be halfway to that next number. If 4 years after this change is implemented, another change were to be considered, then you know we could probably arrive at a number that works. But historically, that's not how these things have been approached, and that's one of the other things that makes it difficult because of the optics, because of the stigma that's assigned to public officials voting a raise for the offices, not for themselves, but for the offices that they currently fill. It does become, I think, a bit of a difficult thing to land on a number that works. And I guess that's where I'm sitting here right now. I'm not sure of the number, and I don't know if others have comments. I'll leave it at that for now.
Well, I'll make a few comments here. This was very much at an impetus that I pushed for mayor and council to see that compensation. The mayor's job has changed over the years. It's changed significantly since I've been involved. I know, speaking with past mayors, the job has changed quite a bit too. One of the interesting things, and I've told the council this many times, at the U.S. Conference of Mayors meeting with another mayor from another community who said, take some time sometime and sit down and put to pen and paper what it costs you to be the mayor. Not including your salary or above your salary. What does it cost you to be the mayor? And I did that when I got home. That was about 2 years ago. And that number was about $45,000 in terms of how it affected my time in my business, some costs of traveling that the town didn't pick up, the fact that a current mayor in their community today, that job is 24/7, 365. It is, because you're the mayor in the community. You know, I sometimes joke that and it's not a joke, if I'm walking downtown from my store to uptown, I can't even do it, to Medici, sometimes it takes me 20 minutes to a half hour to get there because people stop me on the street and have concerns or questions or want to know things. And so that is the job of the mayor. If you're at the grocery store, you're at the hardware store, you're working because people will come up to you and want to know what's going on. So The other thing that affected me in terms of pushing this forward was who can be the mayor. You know, I'm lucky because I had a mature business and I have people that I can trust to work for me, but it also took me out of my business, so I had to hire additional people for day-to-day sales because I'm not there all the time anymore. If you look across the country in council manager forms of government, you see people that are wealthy, you see people that are retired for the most part, and that's who can run for mayor and do the job that Ms. Cummings so eloquently talked about. So I think it's a fair number, and also it's good to remind that this is a number that goes forward. It's for the next mayor, whether that's me or not, whoever that is. That's for the next mayor. Same with council salaries, and that's appropriate. Anybody who gets or votes for a pay increase should have to stand an election to justify that and the other actions that they have. So I'm very supportive of both numbers and both raises. Further on this? Mr. McBride?
Well, it sounds as though we're addressing both at once, which probably just for expedience sake makes a lot of sense. I really have no qualms to my colleague Mr. Fritzen's thoughts that, you know, how do we arrive at a scientific number? I'm not really sure, but I'm comfortable with this. And part of that, frankly, is I've seen now in my 3.5 years on the council just how much time being the mayor requires. And I think you hit on something there, Mayor, that we do want to expand. I mean, this is government, as Lincoln said, of the people, by the people, for the people. That's what local government is. And I think we want to have as wide a pool of available people to consider running for something like this as possible, and that applies to the council too. And I think, you know, there's a financial barrier that exists. So I really I think this is the right thing to do. We don't do what a lot of, what some communities, I shouldn't say a lot, some communities even with a similar form of government do, and that's where, you know, council and mayor receive benefits, and I personally believe that's wrong, and I don't think anybody up here would ever stand for that to happen here, and we don't do that. All that said, I also think that the council increase is the right thing to do, but I hope you all will all forgive me if you understand that I have not been able to myself take the leap, even though it wouldn't take effect for a couple of years. Should the people of Normal decide to have me back come April, I just can't take the leap of, you know, doing something like this that might be perceived as doing it for myself. So I plan on supporting the mayoral measure and voting against the council measure.
Further discussion on this item? Mr. Fritzen?
I would move to amend the item 7 to adjust the salary to $25,000 per year instead of $32,000.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Do we have discussion on the amendment?
I just propose it based on what I mentioned earlier, some calculations and where it would be, and I think because of the optics with it and the stigma that goes along with it, that I think a similar increase to the last increase is what I'm a little more comfortable with.
Thank you. Ms. Lorenz?
Thank you. You know, it's an interesting proposal, amendment, Mr. Fritz, and I appreciate you putting some thought into that. You know, I'm struggling on this issue because while one part of me acknowledges all that's been said so far in support of these increases, insofar as what it does take to, at least I can speak to being a council member, and I can, from witnessing what the mayor does, can appreciate what he's up against. Having said that, and many of you know that I have been struggling with this issue, is the timing. And the timing being one where I apply my household financing tactics here, and I think about the fact that our budget last year wasn't great. I don't know that our budget in the coming year is going to be, notably better. And I just question whether any raise, even a more reasonable number, is a mission critical step we need to take this year. If I were at home and my household budget was being constrained for some reason, and I get this wild idea to go buy a room full of furniture, zero down, and don't have to pay for 36 months on it, I think my husband would probably say no, simply because at that point would not be the right time to obligate ourselves to a large purchase like that, even in the future. And so it's for that reason that I'm really struggling on both of these issues. It's the timing.
Further discussion on the amendment?
I agree with a few statements. I'm gonna try not to bore everybody with repeating a lot of what's been said already. I must confess, I'm perplexed by the room full of furniture for zero money down as compared to mayor and council. That's a little perplexing. I hope we're not suggesting that impulse purchases are the same as mayoral duties. I guess as a small business owner who doesn't work with a safety net, who for 26 years has to make sure that I generate more revenue than I bring in or that I spend, and that I invest in the future so my business continues to grow, that you have to attract good talent that's also going to have that type of priority. And so one of the things that's most perplexing about this is that people hold these seats that we're in either very high regard or high disdain. All you have to do is go on social media and figure out who holds what opinion about these seats. And they do that because they believe that these seats are so important to what's happening in our community. And what just never makes sense to me as a business person is if these seats are so important, then why are they among the lowest paid positions in governance? That just never has made sense. I'm fortunate, I'm a business owner, I don't need this salary. I could do this for nothing. It's okay. I'm fine. But I think about the future, like some of my colleagues have talked about, and then suddenly it means that only the people that look like me and are in my position can be in this seat. And that does concern me. For when I'm not here, when I'm not sitting in the seat, somebody who doesn't have the job that I have, doesn't have the income I have, that can do what I can do and the flexibility, somebody who makes less money, that needs that when they're taking time away. I was just on a community benchmarking economic development trip to Greenville, South Carolina, 3 days out of my time. As a business owner, I was making $0 when I was gone during that time. It does actually cost all of my colleagues some money. When you think about this from a dollars and cents perspective, it costs more to run a campaign to hold this seat than it does than you earn in a year doing this job. Doesn't make a lot of sense when you think about it, because people aren't doing this job for the money. So I'm always perplexed by this conversation, but I'm also equally as uncomfortable in talking about a potential raise that I may benefit if the voters of normalcy to put me back in the seat if I choose to run again in 2 more years from now. But I'm supportive of the increase. We're talking about a slight difference now. Again, I'm not hung up on a particular number, but I think particularly related to the mayor job now that I've certainly got a partial glimpse of what our current mayor invests in our community in terms of time. and energy and effort, and I hope whoever sits there in the future can and will do that going forward, because I think the town of Normal is not a get-by kind of community. It requires a lot of investment on the behalf of our government, and I sure hope whoever sit in that seat next will approach the town of Normal governments in that same way. I'm supportive.
Further discussion on the amendment? Please call the roll.
Mr. McBride?
No.
Mrs. Cummings?
Nay.
Mrs. Lorenz?
No.
Mr. McCarthy?
Yes.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
No. The ordinance passes. Number 8.
No. The amendment.
That was the amendment.
That was the
Oh, I'm sorry, the amendment passes, correct. So back to the original ordinance.
Does not pass.
It didn't?
It was 3-3?
It is 4-2.
No was
He was a no.
no a,
4 noes, 2 yeses.
I should have clarified that. Can we do the vote again? Because a no would be to not accept the amendment.
Correct.
Yes would be to accept the amendment.
Correct.
That was my understanding.
Yes, mine too.
So,
4 noes, 2
So
yeses.
4 no's on the amendment.
Correct.
so the
The
amendment passes.
original, original.
Oh.
Back to the original 32,000.
Yeah, it's back. The amendment failed.
The amendment failed.
Thank you. Back to the original amendment. Is there a discussion on that?
Original ordinance.
Original ordinance.
I'm sorry.
Which amends, yeah. There's a
Let's
lot
make
of
it the mayor a cupcake.
Is there a discussion on, is there discussion on that? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
No.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen?
No,
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The ordinance is approved. Item 8 is an ordinance adjusting the salary of a member of the Board of Trustees effective May 2021 and amending Section 2.2-2 of the Municipal Code of the Town of Normal. Motion for approval?
Approval.
Second.
Thank you. Discussion on this item. Mr. Fritzen?
unless, I don't want to quench any discussion on the item, but it's not, I think we had all the discussion. I would offer an amendment to this one as well to adjust the number to $6,000 per year.
A second on that amendment.
I'll second it.
Thank you. Discussion on that amendment.
Same reasoning as before.
Sure. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Lorenz?
No.
Mr. McCarthy?
No.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
No.
Mrs. Cummings?
No.
Mayor Kus?
No. The amendment did not pass. Back to the original ordinance. Discussion further. Please call the roll.
Mr. McCarthy?
Yes.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
No.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
No.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The ordinance is approved. Item 9 is an ordinance rezoning property in the town of Normal at 606 South Main Street, having to do with fire headquarters.
Move approval.
Second.
Is there discussion on this item? Please call the roll.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The ordinance is approved. We have 2 items of new business. The first is a motion to approve the fiscal year 2018-2019 to fiscal year 2023 to 24 Community Investment Plan. Motion for approval.
So moved.
Second.
Before we do that, I think Andrew Hune, do you have comments?
Yes, well, I'll just speak for a moment while Andrew comes up and gets the presentation ready to go. This capital investment program is part of our annual budget preparation process. So annually, we come to council and review our capital investment program for the next 5 years or so. And following your approval tonight of the CIP, we take that into consideration and incorporate that into the proposed budget that you will see in January. So, Andrew?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. It's my pleasure to present this information to you tonight. As Pam mentioned, this is an annual event, typically in December, and really represents our first formal document to you as part of our budget process for the year. The CIP or Community Investment Plan essentially represents staff's recommendation and spending plan for the next 5 years. We do this each year. And in terms of the plan itself, there's about 122 projects planned for the next 5 years, including the current year plus 5, at about a total of $88.3 million of spending over that 5-year period. We split these items, these capital projects, into essentially 5 categories in terms of kind of budget capacity and budget funding. I'll kind of present what those are and give you a little background to give you kind of a feel or flavor for what's going on with all the spending. It's actually quite a traverse of activity. The first category we refer to as public facilities, and this represents renovations and construction projects that relate to municipal operational buildings. Our second area is capital assets, and these you're quite familiar with as every category. This category is where we fund vehicles and major equipment. This can span all departments. Typically the larger areas are public works, where we're purchasing waste carrier trucks and dump trucks and so forth. Police obviously purchase a lot of vehicles for the patrol, fire vehicles or ambulances and fire engines. And then parks and rec vehicles, of course, are bobcats and dump trucks and so forth. We also invest in this area for a lot of capital equipment, such as information technology and public facilities. The third category is transportation development. This, of course, where we have all the road work, street resurfacing, road construction, bridges, sidewalks, traffic lights. Everything had to do with essentially the infrastructure of our city road system. So the fourth category is parks and open space. This, of course, is, as you would figure, parks is our playgrounds, our pools, our the golf course, and so forth. And then the last one is utility services, which is our enterprise fund operations, water and sewer infrastructure, and stormwater. In terms of year-to-year analysis, the spending has stayed relatively stable, and as you know, we plan on a 5-year budget window, so we kind of make tweaks as we go down that road in terms of funding decisions and what's going to be appropriate for the next 5 years. But it typically stays pretty stable. In terms of the 5-year spending plan we did this time last year, we're at about $94.5 million of 5-year spending. This year it's a little bit down. It's down to 88.3. In terms of the categories, there are 2 that were down a bit. We do know that we're going to have to do some additional spending in those areas. These are public facilities. We know we have some essentially unavoidable costs there to maintain the buildings, building envelope, roofs, heating and cooling systems, and so forth. We don't have a lot of spending in the out years for that, and we plan to address that as part of our budget process this year and perhaps during the fiscal year too. The second category that's a bit down from previous years is parks and open space. A very similar situation. This is town-owned property that needs to be maintained, the pools, the golf course, playground equipment. We know we have some spending needs in these areas in the out years that at this time we're not able to adequately address. It's not a crisis by any stretch of the imagination, but it is something we do need to address, and we do plan to come back to you with that with some future ideas. The other areas, capital assets, we're actually up in spending, and that's really a function of just the useful life of the vehicles and the equipment. That can change, plus or minus $3 or $4 million a year. $22.8 million that we're spending in the next 5 years on that area. Transportation development, that's of course the road and bridge fund. That's pretty stable year to year. We continue to spend accordingly with that spending. And then I guess really in terms of a success story, in terms of this capital spending plan, is the utility services, water and sewer and stormwater. Water for many years, as you know, has been contributing and dedicating quite a bit of resources to capital funding for many, many years. Sewer was a bit behind in that area. The council addressed this almost 2 years ago now or maybe a little over a year ago, now with a sewer master plan study that required a great deal of work on staff and consultant time. and then council also passed a rate adjustment to pay for that. So what has transpired since that process in the budget is significantly more spending for capital infrastructure for the sewer system. This amounts to a lot of televising of the sewer system, lining projects, and so forth. So that's nice to see. It was an area that was needed. The council addressed it, and it's being implemented now in the next 5 years as our budget process. As you can see, for that line alone, roughly about $5 million in spending for the 5 years, and that's mostly contributed to the sewer plan and the sewer study. We do make this plan available to the public, and even staff use this tool heavily through kind of an interactive site. It's available online. I'm going to show you a couple things here. This is unchanged from the previous year. I'll just kind of point a few things out. You can see we have many funding sources for capital money. It comes from the general fund, as in the capital fund, which you're seeing on your screen now. We have MFT funds, which are motor fuel tax. We have water and sewer funds through rates that pass. So there's quite a bit of funding sources. We break it down by funding source and, of course, by category. For this one, this is capital. So this is all money funded from the general fund. The lion's share of it is what we refer to as public facilities and parks and open development space. And you can see that we've got several projects in the queue right now, but the out years are a little light, and this is the area we're going to address in the future. In terms of this information, it's available online. You can click to get more information on a particular project. We'll just do a couple random clicks here. The Community Activity Center, you click on that, and it gives you a little bit of a narrative on what's the project involved. It gives you a contact information. It's Director Mark Clinch and facilities. And several of these areas have certainly a narrative, a little more discussion about the budget, and then they might have a graphic or two in terms of a photograph, or in this case, it's got just a graphic for some of the roof replacement needs. Some are more detailed than others, of course, but this gives you a flavor for where to go to get more information. Let me put another big one here with almost $1 million for the railway pedestrian crossing project. Again, the council is very familiar with that project. It's an ongoing project we're looking at in terms of connecting the north and south of Uptown. And if you click on that, it gives you, again, a little more detail, some conceptual pictures that are simply just there for concept only. And that project is obviously ongoing in terms of the funding and so forth. Let me go back here. We'll pick a few more funding sources. Again, motor fuel tax. Probably a good example there is you can see Glen Avenue Bridge, $300,000 this year, 1.2 planned for next fiscal year. Click on that, and you again pull up a description of the project, some of the funding, who's the engineer on the project, and a photograph there of the actual bridge that will ultimately be addressed. And kind of a final one, again, to see, you can see all the funding sources here. We'll slip down here to sewer. Let me see where we're at. Here we go. A lot going on there. As you said, if you would have seen this report a couple years ago, it would not have been nearly as robust, which is nice to see. You can see the spending plan that's been laid out from the sewer study. It laid out a lot of televising. We'll click on one of these here. You can see, again, some information about the process from the sewer master plan, and some graphics here in terms of some of the areas that will be addressed and displayed. I'm not going to go into detail about what that is, but you can see that for yourself. And you can see that that's going on in terms of every year we have televising the trunk sewers there, doing some more in the next year, some more the next year, and then obviously doing some lining projects too. We'll click on this one. Oops, that's a little big, I apologize, but you can kind of see again that it's all there in terms of trying to provide the citizenry and even internal staff the documentation to help explain what's going on with these. It's a fairly robust system. It's homegrown, and it works very well. As Pam suggested or mentioned, once this is approved, then we essentially pull these numbers into the budget that you'll see in January for the work session and also for March for final approval. This is a very robust process. It works very well for us on a staff level. I know that you've been reading this information and been given reports off and on before to this evening, but we certainly want to address any questions you might have on a specific project. The other department heads would need to address most of that in terms of detail, but we're happy to address anything you might have on the specific projects or the funding sources or the changes and so forth.
Questions for Mr. Hune? Ms. Lorenz?
Specific question on, in the capital fund on the Route 66 bike trail. As I understand it, that's an intergovernmental project between 5 communities along historic Route 66 in McLean County. Do we know for certain that the other entities are in on that?
I would default to the director.
Oh, and I'm going to defer to City Engineer Ryan Otto on this one, because we actually budget every year for our obligations, and oftentimes our funds are carried over from one year to the next because it is based on when the county is moving forward with the program. And thank you. And I think Ryan was going to have conversations to see where it stands this year, because we are carrying those funds every year to meet our obligation.
Okay.
The next phase of the trail is the section from Shirley to Funks Grove. That is currently under design by the county. The McLean County Highway Department is the lead agency, and along with the other communities, we have fully funded the design of that project. And my understanding from conversations with the other communities is they plan to fund the construction. A major portion of this funding comes from the transportation improvement funding from the state of Illinois, which is funded through the federal government as well. So 80% of the funding comes from that grant, and 20% comes from the local match. And of the 20%, we fund through the town about 30% of the 20%. So if you do the math, it comes out to the numbers you see in the budget. So yes, my understanding is that the other communities are supportive of the project, and we plan to hope to move forward when design is complete in fiscal year 1920.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions on the CIP? Mr. McBride?
Just, a comment more than a question, and I really do say this without judgment, but it's interesting as I sit here throughout the meeting, and it's fascinating that, and there are reasons for it, I get that, but the increases in pay that we talked about earlier this evening that amount for less than $25,000 a year accounted for 100% of the public comment, and I suspect the great majority of social media traffic, and stemming from that, I suspect most of the media coverage going forward. But the CIP, that is our prioritization and speaks volumes about what our priorities are, and involves millions of dollars potentially over 5 years, we don't hear much about. So in that spirit, I would encourage folks, and I think staff does a remarkable job pulling all this together and prioritizing based on what finances allow. But I would really encourage folks to take some time with this document, go on the website, not just what we're approving and what we deem critical, but these are projects in your neighborhoods. Take a look, click on these things. If you see something that's important to you, and let us know about it. If it's in your neighborhood and it's a high priority to you, what we hear from you, the citizens, informs our decisions and informs staff's prioritization. So I just put that out there. And again, thank you all for all your work on this.
Mr. McCarthy.
Yeah, I didn't have any questions about the line items, but as I do every year, I really appreciate this process and the amount of work you folks do in this. Somebody's an Excel guru in this process who put all this together, but for us to be able to look down very easily and online, the public, anybody can do on a project level peak and understand its priority and importance and criticality to the operation of the town and funding sources and where it's come from the budget. Be able to put all of that online, and that simple makes our job much easier when we come to budget time. But for the public to be able to see the priority of their tax dollars at work is phenomenally wonderful. Thanks for all the work on this.
The other thing I'm going to mention is every single department participates in this process. So it's not the big ones like Public Works and Parks and Recreation and Engineering and Finance, it's everybody, because it does include the Vehicle and Equipment Replacement Fund, which affects every single department. So every department head has some responsibility and works towards this project, or towards getting the CIP completed, and helps us build it into the budget. So it is definitely a team effort. So.
Thank you. And not being repetitive, I think it's safe to say that every council member values the work that staff does on this. It is indeed a pretty revolutionary document in terms of getting a lot of information to people with very easy access. So thank you for all the hard work on that. Please call the roll.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The motion is approved. Item 11 is a motion to approve an appointments to the Children's Discovery Museum Foundation Board, the Convention and Visitors Bureau, and the Sister Cities Committee.
Move approval.
Second.
Second. Thank you. As this is an item of personnel, there will be no discussion unless a council member would like to take this to executive session. And seeing no such request, please call the roll.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The appointments are approved, Mr. Fritzen, and it's quite a list. Have at it.
Yeah. First, Children's Discovery Museum Foundation Board, Tracy Henry. Ms. Henry is Assistant Executive Director of the Illinois High School Association. She resides in Bloomington. She and her husband are museum members, regular visitors with their 2 children. She's an Illinois State graduate, and I've known Tracy since she was a graduate assistant at Illinois State and worked in the athletic department there, and she's great. So she'll be a great benefit to us on the board. Her term will expire in June 30th of 2022. Sister Cities Committee. This is the Asai Sister Cities Committee. 2 additional members and 1 filling a vacancy. Added to the committee are Patrick Clapper. Mr. Clapper resides in Normal, and recommended by Darren Sampson, the chair of the Sister Cities Committee. Mr. Clapper graduated from the University of Missouri and employed by State Farm, formerly worked and resided in Japan, and has been active in the Sister Cities program. And we know that this particular Sister Cities Committee, just by its longevity and the like, has played a key role in some development aspects that have happened in the Twin Cities over the last several decades. So it has paid some dividends for us beyond the relationship. The next appointment is Sally Modine. She resides in Hudson, is employed by the Unit 5 School District at Kingsley Junior High, and her son Nicholas participated in the Junior Ambassador Exchange to Asai, and she's been active with the Sister Cities program for some time. And third, Ryan Apple. Mr. Apple resides in Normal and has served in the United States Air Force, was an exchange student in Japan. Get some really good inside information here for the committee. Participating in the Junior Ambassador program. His grandmother served on the Sister Cities Committee following his exchange program. So he's been active in the program and looks forward to continuing his involvement. Convention and Visitors Bureau Board. CVB Board of Directors recently adopted a revised and updated set of bylaws establishing terms of appointment and expectations for each of the communities, the Twin Cities. Under the new bylaws, the mayor of Normal can appoint 4 board members, and Mayor Kus is recommended, and we've just approved the appointment of Kevin McCarthy, who is serving as the designee representing the mayor of Normal. Council member Kathleen Lorenz to serve as the designated representative of the Normal Town Council. Mr. McGiddy Timbo of Atrium Hospitality, the general manager of the Marriott, and Elizabeth Wisman, better known to us as Beth, but our cultural arts director for the town of Normal. They're going to serve on the Convention and Visitors Bureau Board.
Thank you. That concludes our business tonight. Are there concerns or comments before we adjourn? Motion for adjournment?
Move approval.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mayor Cuse?
Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you.